It's a pleasure to be here. I found the place, which was an achievement for me. I'm going to talk about my life during World War II, a little bit before, and the rest of the time that I lived in the Netherlands, which was then occupied by the Nazis, the Germans, and what happened to me and others. There will be time for questions at the end, and don't be bashful, because I'm not bashful at all. And I was born, like he said, on the 4th of July, which in the Netherlands doesn't mean anything, it's just a date, because it's not American. And I was born in a small village in the eastern part of the Netherlands, where my grandparents had a general store. Little village, general store, my grandparents' home, still there, standing. The room where I was born is still there, same window, nothing has changed. The church is still over there, even though we didn't go to that church. We were Jewish. And but that was the central church of the village. I didn't grow up in the village, but I visited very frequently later. I don't know at what age they transported me to my real home in the city of Amsterdam. My dad was a CPA, and we lived in a nice area. There were a lot in that area, there were an awful lot of German refugees as well, who had fled during the years between 1933 and 1939, who had fled Germany, and they thought they would be safe in the Netherlands. The reason they thought they would be safe, because during World War I, when the Germans had invaded Belgium, France, and all these places, they had not invaded the Netherlands. Well, they did something different this time, but I'll get to that in a minute. I went to a regular school. We were not religious, just regular public school, and that was from age 5, 6, I don't remember. I really don't remember. Anybody here remembers those days? Or that age? I'm sure it's hard to remember what happened. And but I went to school, I had fun, got into all kinds of devilry, because I wasn't a very, shall we say, kid who did what he was told. So I did as much as I could, all kind of things which were not allowed. But I learned well. It was easy for me to study at school. And they gave us a lot of stuff to study. There were good schools. And we just had fun. There was no discrimination. Everybody was the same. There was nothing between a blonde and a dark-haired person. We had people from Indonesia there, which in those days was the Dutch East Indies. They were colonies. We had people, real black people, from the Caribbean, which were also Dutch colonies. They were just part of it, part of the group, part of the crowd. And the only thing I had as a problem was that I was a little jerk, and the tall guys used to tease, "Hey little guy," and so on and all that. And they didn't do that too often, because I used to kick, bite, and hit when I didn't like something. So I had the respect of my peers, and I never had any problems. Now, my dad, like I said, was a CPA, and I had a grandmother who was extremely rich, and so I was a spoiled brat. You can't say anything else about me, except that I was a spoiled brat. And I had a lot of fun. And not living in an area, in a climate where there was discrimination was wonderful. Well, all that changed on the 10th of May, 1940, when the Germans invaded not only the Netherlands, but Belgium, Norway, France, and so on and on. Everybody was invaded. And so was the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, it took them only 5 days, because they were not prepared, or we were not prepared to fight. We didn't have an army. We had an army, but ridiculous. My dad was a second lieutenant. That was all he had ever aspired to, and that was what he was. And his platoon, or whatever it was that he had as transport bicycles. So they had bicycles to travel and fight against German tanks. Well, you know, that took only, like I said, 5 days. And the Germans conquered, occupied the Netherlands. And all of a sudden, things didn't go so well for people like me, and my dad, and my mom, and my friends, my girlfriend. I had a girlfriend, even at that age. I started early. And she was from Germany, by the way. One of the people who came at the same time as the Frank family, and lived in the same area. We all knew each other. And all of a sudden, life became very difficult for us, because we were not allowed to do a lot of things. We were not allowed to travel. No public transport for us. From the day that that edict came out, which was probably a couple of months after they had occupied the Netherlands, from that day I never saw my grandparents. I never saw my uncles, my aunts, my nephews. Nothing. I didn't have any, except my parents. I didn't have any family except those who lived somewhere in Amsterdam. But for that you couldn't take the public transport, because Jews were not allowed on public transport. We were outcasts. We were not so much outcasts because we were bad, but because we were Jews. It was a religious persecution. We had curfew. We couldn't go out in the evening, and we certainly couldn't go out to movie theaters, concerts, cafes, or restaurants or whatever. We couldn't go out to any of these places. We could stay at home if we wanted to, or we could walk in the street. But you had to walk on the corner of the pavement, because there were Germans who walked on the other part of the street, and you were not allowed there when they were there. So it was very, very difficult for us. They fired, everybody had to fire from their jobs the people of the wrong religion. So if you had a Jewish company, made shoes or whatever, what they made, and you had employees who were from the Catholic religion or whatever, you couldn't keep them, you had to throw them out. Well, the majority, obviously, of the Dutch people were non-Jewish. So all of a sudden, the Jewish companies were totally ruined because they could not use any non-Jewish employees, and they had to close up, and vice versa. If you were Jewish and you worked for a company, like my dad as a CPA, he couldn't work there anymore. He was fired. He was out of a job with many. And the next thing they did to us there was they started rounding up people from the streets and from the houses. They just went from street to street, closed off the street, went into the houses, if they knew there were Jewish people living there, took them out of the houses, put them on a truck. From the trucks, they were transported to the train, and the trains went to the concentration camps. Now, concentration camps, you probably have heard of them. They were real hellholes. And you know how many there were? Nearly 20,000 different camps in Western Europe alone. They were all over the place. And they used to concentrate a bunch of people in one, and then they used to transport them to another place. And they rounded up people from the streets and from the houses, and my dad got rounded up. And he got picked up by one group of Nazis and sent to a concentration camp in the eastern part of the Netherlands. And he understood German very well because of his type of business he did and the companies he worked with. And one day he heard the officers who were in charge of the camp, he heard them talk about what they were going to be doing. They were going to be closing the camp and sending the people to a concentration camp in Germany. Well, my dad decided that he wasn't going to let that happen. And he just managed to escape. I think I inherited some of his escape artist talents. He managed to escape, and by escaping, he became a criminal in the eyes of the Germans, according to their laws. He was now a criminal Jew. As a criminal, he couldn't be out on the streets, and we were automatically, my mother and I were automatically included as criminals as well. So we had to go into hiding. We all went into hiding, and we met together at a certain place. But if you think that it was easy to go into hiding, just think of it for a moment yourself. If you had to go into hiding somewhere, where would you go and be sure that they couldn't find you? You have to find a place. You have to find people who are willing to endanger themselves by hiding you and your family. You've got to take care of that family. You've got to supply them with food and with all the things a person might need. What happens when you get sick, or when that person who's hiding in your home gets sick, gets bronchitis, gets flu, gets whatever? You've got to go and get him to a doctor or her to a doctor. And you've got to get medicines for that person. And you've got to take care of that person. And you've got to feed that person. You've got to buy food. How do you do that? In a society which is at war, because we were German-occupied territory, and Germany was at war, and so we were at war. It wasn't an easy thing to go into hiding just like that. You just didn't walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, can you hide me?" So we went into hiding, and we went into hiding through friends. We went into hiding on a farm. Now I loved that. I loved it on the farm. I loved animals. I loved working. I had learned in the little village of my grandparents to work with horses, cattle, pigs, chickens, anything. And I enjoyed it. And I used to feed them, to feed these animals. In the morning at 5 o'clock you get up and get up on the mow, as they call it, and get the hay down for the cattle if it was winter, or take them out of the village to the pasture. I loved that. I was crazy about it. And I was good at it. Maybe that's why I stayed in Nebraska, because there's so much agriculture here. And when I think back, it really was a good time except for one thing. The farmer had two daughters who were about 7, 8 years older than I was. I was by that time 10, 11 years old. And I was abused sexually by those girls. It was not very pleasant. But I couldn't do much about it, because they told me if I talked, they would go to the authorities. I was too afraid of them doing that to think it through, that if they'd done that, their parents would have been the first ones to go to a camp. So I feel sure, had I been able to think it through, I would not have worried about it. But I did. So I kept my mouth shut. And I went through that abuse as long as I was there. Now I don't know exactly how long I was there. I have no idea, because I didn't have a calendar and I didn't have a piece of chalk to mark off, and I've never thought about it, to mark off the number of days. I had no reason to do that. So I just lived with it. It became part of my life. Just like the poop of the chickens and what have you and everything else. We left. All of a sudden, one day, my dad said, "We are leaving tomorrow." I asked why, he wouldn't tell me. Parents didn't talk to kids seriously in those days. They didn't confide in them. We were supposed to have brains who couldn't grasp that. Well, he didn't tell me and I didn't know, so we went to a different place. Now we went to a city, and we were in a building which was in a huge apartment building, full of old apartments. It was an old building, old apartment, old plumbing. There was no bathtub. There was no shower. You did your washing and everything in a steel tub, a galvanized iron tub, which you put in the kitchen, and you heated the water on the gas stove, if there was gas. If not, you cleaned yourselves just a little bit with a wet rag and some soap, and that's how you cleaned yourself. So I'm sure we didn't smell very nice in those days, but I don't remember. I just don't remember. But we were in an apartment, in only a room and a half of that apartment. And that meant we had neighbors, above, below, sides, everywhere. And we had to be quiet. Can you imagine having to be quiet, totally quiet, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? We had to do that. We were not the only ones in the war which had that kind of a problem. There were kids in my orphanage after the war which were even in worse shape than I was. I had my parents with me. We had games with them. We had chess, and we had checkers, and we had parcheesi, and all sorts of card games. So we could do it, but we had to be quiet. Can you imagine what it is to have, for a kid of 11 years old, to be quiet 24/7 and not to make noise? I make noise now, even if I'm half asleep. And in those days, that was very hard for me. And it was even harder on my parents, who had to keep me quiet. Because if the neighbors would hear, they might start asking questions. And you did not want any questions to be asked. That was dangerous. So there we lived. Again, a couple of months, maybe 3-4 months, I'm not sure. Because, like I said, I didn't have any way to mark it off. I mean, I didn't think of it. Would you think of it? when you were 10, 11, maybe 12 years old. Anyway, there came the day that all of a sudden the bell rang downstairs, and the lady from downstairs, who was our landlady and who used to bring food once a day and take the slop bucket down with her to put it through the toilet. The lady pushed the button of the buzzer which operated the door opener of the street door. And the door was thrown open violently. And steps came running up the stairs. And voices shouted, "Polizei! Stehen bleiben! Police! Stay where you are!" I froze. I knew what had happened. This was it. I froze. I was so afraid. I couldn't move. It is as if, it's like a bad dream. It's like a bad dream when a monster comes after you and you can't move. And that's what happened to me. But then all of a sudden, my mother started crying, wailing. She knew the gig was up. And then my dad, who always was very civilized and very measured in what he said a few curses which I knew from the streets of Amsterdam, but I wouldn't have expected my dad to know him even. So he said those words, and that woke me up. And I ran to the back doors of the room, and I grabbed those doors and pushed them open, jumped on the porch, and climbed on the railing, ready to jump. Now we were on the 3rd floor. Forgot to tell you, I always forget something. And so we were on the 3rd floor, and I was ready to jump. And I looked over my left shoulder. I still know it was my left shoulder, because I know where I jumped. I looked, and my dad had grabbed those doors, pulled them close behind me. He probably saved my life by doing that, because when the Nazis came into the room, it didn't look as if somebody had escaped to the outside. And that gave me enough time to get away. I was jumping down, and I hit there was an awning on the ground floor, the 1st floor. There was an awning there. I hit it at the right angle. Was it luck, or did I do something? I don't know. And it broke my fall, and I slid down, and it landed on my feet in front of a judge who had been posted there to catch us kid peas. He didn't do anything. He didn't say anything. He didn't take his little submachine gun, his Schmeisser, off his shoulder. He didn't do anything, and I ran. I wasn't going to stand there and ask him, "Sir, may I please go?" I was running. And the weather was bad, actually, because it was November. It was November the 2nd, in fact, 1942. And it always rains in November. And the gardens were mud. And the walls were slick because they had walls in between the gardens. They didn't have fences like you have here, but they had walls in between the gardens. And I climbed those walls, and I ran and climbed the wall, and ran and climbed the wall, and ran until I couldn't go anymore. And then I knew I had to hide. So I climbed up on the rain spout of one of the houses and sat down on the second floor underneath a galvanized bathtub. It wasn't a very big one, but I wasn't a very big guy, so I could hide. And I couldn't see the Germans, and I figured they couldn't see me. And that was true, they couldn't. And there I sat and started to relax. But you know what happens if you've been under great tension and you start to relax? You sometimes have that when you go into a doctor or something like that, or whatever. I started to relax. And when I relaxed, my muscles relaxed. And all the tension went out of me. And I had to go. I had to go potty. I had to do a big one. And I wasn't going to poop in my pants for anything, you know. I didn't do things. Even a 10-year-old doesn't do that. So I wasn't going to poop in my pants. I had to find some way to get rid of that. And I got out from under the tub, and I found paper bags which they used to bring coal up to the coal bin. And there were some cloth bags, and there was a flower pot. I scooted underneath the tub again. I did what I had to do, cleaned myself as well as I could with the stuff I collected, put it all in a heap and put the flower pot over it, and found that I can't sit there together with the flower pot because the tub was a little bit too small. And every movement I made, it creaked and all that, it made a noise, and I didn't want to do that because that might bring the people out. The people who lived there in the apartment. I was lucky, probably they weren't at home. I got out from under the tub and I went into the coal bin, and now it was time to make decisions. I was in a strange city. I mean, it's like Omaha, in distance between here and Omaha. And I was in a strange part of that city which I didn't know. I'd been there before with my parents to another part of the city, but this was different. And I had no idea. I was on the outskirts, near the train station. And I knew that the only place where we had a contact was in the center of the old city. And it was a very old city, beautiful city. And it was, the house I was trying to find was beside the high tower, the only big tower in that city. And the tower had a lot of bells which played every quarter of an hour, a tune. And I oriented myself on that tower. I listened to the music every quarter of an hour. And I slowly found my way. Now, it was 3 o'clock when they came for us in that place, the Germans. It was 9 o'clock when I found the place which I wanted to go to, where the man who had arranged for our hiding places and for our ration cards, because everything was rationed in the Netherlands. It was war. It was 9 o'clock when I got to his house. We had been there before because we knew them. Well, turns out they couldn't help me because the man of the house, who was part of a small group of resistance people who helped Jewish people and other people to hide and supplied them with food and all their needs. If you had to go to a doctor, they could arrange that. And so he had been betrayed as well, and they were looking for him. And so they were going to come to that house, and if they would find me there, I had no papers, I had no name, except my own Jewish one. I had no address. What was I going to tell them? In 5 minutes they would find out that I was Jewish, because, another thing, in those days, only the Jewish people in the Netherlands were circumcised. So the thing they did was, grown up and little boys, they pulled their pants down and see if they were circumcised or not. I couldn't stay there. I would be a danger to the people there. So I got some clothes from them, from the kids. I got some food from them, from their dairy store. And I went out in the night. And I started going east. Now, how did I know at night where the east and the west was? Well, in the Netherlands, the prevailing winds are from the west to the east. And there's always some bit of a moon above the clouds. And so, you only have to look up. You see the cloud. From time to time you see a light shining a little bit, and you see it going that way. You know that is east, and you go that way. Why was I going east? Because going west, I would go into the most densely populated area, and also where most of the Germans were. So I didn't want to do that. So get away from there and go to the forests and try and find your way there. Well, I don't know how long I was on my own. I managed to eat sporadically, drink milk. There were cows in the field. They didn't like being milked in the middle of the night by some monster with cold hands. But I managed that. There were chicken houses where they had eggs. Chickens lay eggs, don't they? So you grab an egg, you break it, and you eat it, and that's it. There were apples still on the trees, late apples, sour apples. But they were sort of like Granny Smith apples. There were farmhouses, because the farmer and the wife, quite often in the morning, you could see him go with the horse-drawn wagon, and they would go out in the house together. and they never locked the house. So I'd go in, I'd steal bread, I'd steal butter, I'd steal cheese, I'd steal ham, I'd steal anything which was edible, and put it in a bag and drag it with me. And I slept during the daylight hours. And daylight in that area part of the world, really daylight only starts at about 9 o'clock in the morning till about 3:30 in the afternoon. So I had plenty of time to steal and sleep. I slept in haystacks. I slept anywhere. And I used bags to cover me. These cloth bags, it's not the nicest stuff. But were you tired? And I was tired, my body was tired, because I didn't eat properly. And so I had a lot of diarrhea, which tired me out, which made me weak. But I lived. And then one day I was caught by a farmer in the haystack. I always tried to go to a haystack where they were not working on. And here I'd crawled into one on one side, and they were working on the other side. And he found me. And that was very unpleasant. And I was very much afraid. But he didn't go to the authorities. I had the name of a resistance person I knew, and I asked him to find that person for me, or to let that person know where I was, and I would work for free for him. And I could. I could do sprashing, haying, whatever you wanted me to do, because I'd learned that in my years in the village of my grandparents, and while working on the other farm, when I wasn't fooling around with those girls, or they weren't fooling around with me, rather. So he agreed. He found people from the resistance, from a resistance group. I'm still in touch with one of them who's still alive. And they took me in and shielded me the rest of the war. I had papers, I could walk outside, I could go to school, if there was school, which wasn't often because they used to round up teachers, male teachers, and we had male teachers. And so school was very sporadic, to say the least. But I stayed with the resistance until the end of the year, until the end of the war, which was on May 8, 1945. So we were occupied from May 10, 1940 till May 8, 1945.